All right, here we go. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another lifelong learning lecture. We're very pleased to have with us,
Nina,
again tonight, Dr. Helen Heineman, who's going to be talking to us tonight about Lord Byron, still worth reading.
Nina,
And many of you have come in muted. If you are not muted, I'm going to ask that you please mute yourself, and those who are already muted, if you would remain muted throughout this talk to avoid any unintended disruptions, I'd very much appreciate that. You're going to see in the chat in a few moments a link to our evaluation form. I'm going to ask that you, if you have any feedback you'd like to share with us, we certainly welcome that, along with any ideas you have for future talks. Q&A will be held at the end of this talk. We ask that you please drop your questions into the chat box. And with that, Helen, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everyone. My lecture tonight, Lord Byron, Still Worth Reading, is about a poet who meant a lot to me. I actually wrote my master's thesis on him, so I'm happy to share some of my old research and some new with you tonight. Byron was called by one of his lovers, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. His name has become a universal adjective. The word Byronic signifies a dark and dangerous figure, brooding and charismatic, usually hiding a secret in his past. And his works have inspired the creation of others like him, Heathcliff and Mr. Rochester, to name but two. Now, his poetry is not often taught nowadays, and this is because most of it is long narrative poems, not now in fashion. But in this 200th anniversary of his death in 1824, it's a good time to celebrate his considerable talent. In our time, he has become better known for the life he lived than for the poetry he wrote. Of the so-called Big Six romantic poets, he's the hardest to place, but nobody wrote quite like him. He was the first celebrity writer, and his breakthrough poem was published when he was only 24. It was called Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. One day he said, "I awoke one morning to find I was famous." After some scandalous conduct and the failure of his marriage, he left England forever, overindulging himself sexually and otherwise. His comic masterpiece is Don Juan. It looks like Don Juan, but he always insisted it be Anglicanized and pronounced Don Juan. Incomplete at 16 cantos. He continued a lifelong quest for religious belief, most especially during his time in Venice at the monastery of San Lazzaro. He died at 36, fighting in the Greek War for independence. He began as an early Calvinist. Calvinism, 19th century Calvinism anyway, is founded on predestination. You're supposed to know at once if you are predestined to go to heaven or to be damned. He was born with a deformed right foot, which made walking difficult. This deformity was uppermost in his thoughts. He had a very conflicted relationship to his own body. He was driven to alternating fits of physical exercise, displays of athleticism, of starvation diets, and extreme indulgence of sexual promiscuity. At the times, he thought of his disability as a punishment, a mark of Cain. He had been shaped by the strict Scottish Calvinism of his upbringing, particularly his nurses. One of his nurses began seducing him when he was only 9 years old. She was discovered and dismissed, but by then the episodes had been occurring for 2 years. Childhood innocence was taken from him too soon. He was taught pious lessons from the Bible, and it's no wonder that he learned to despise hypocrisy and develop complex attitudes toward sexuality. He moved with his mother to Newstead Abbey, a great estate. Later, he used it as a kind of boys' clubhouse with pistol shooting and fencing, bouts of wine drinking, sex parties. It was quite a riotous place. He then went to Harrow School, and he made many passionately declared friendships with men at Harrow. He started writing poetry there. His mother reproached him with his personal deformity, and she had a violent temper. He also had a half-sister, Augusta, with whom he later formed a sexual relationship. At Cambridge, he kept a bear, feeding him bread and milk, telling everyone who asked that the bear should sit for a fellowship. He collected a degree from Cambridge, which he certainly didn't earn. He spent freely, he indulged his appetite for high living and the company of sexually available women. In addition to his bear, he had 3 dogs always with him. His favorite was bitten by a rabid animal and died. Byron buried the dog in the immediate back garden of the Abbey in a vault large enough for his own tomb. He published Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which was a smash hit and made him instantly famous. It propelled his creator like a meteor. At age 24, he was hobnobbing with the best society, conducting love affairs with women of distinguished parentage, many of whom were married. More problematic was his relationship with his half-sister, Augusta Lee. This relationship determined the course of his reputation. He had many affairs, one with Caroline Lamb, and had a child by her. She's the person who wrote in her journal that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. She loved him, but he tired of her, and he determined to end the affair. One duchess, he wrote, said, his poem Childe Harold is on every table. He is courted, visited, flattered, and praised wherever he appears. He's the only topic of conversation. Men are jealous of him, women are jealous of each other. That summer, he had that affair with his half-sister. He said he saw 3 paths of escape: poetry, travel, or marriage. He wrote in his journal, "A wife would be my salvation. I'm sure the wives of my acquaintances have done me a little good." And so he married. He married the highly eligible and well-born Anne and Isabella Milbank. And this is Lady Byron. She, by the way, was one of the early inventors of the computer. She was a very knowledgeable mathematician. But the new Lady Byron was unhappy with the presence of his half-sister in his home, and he began flaunting his feelings for her. He would stay up late with her, dismissing his wife with the words, "Now I have her, you find I can do without you." When he married, he began warning his wife regarding his past, and this alternated with episodes of tenderness and shared sexual enjoyment, but he continued his intimacy with Augusta. He seemed determined to ruin his marriage. His sister offered an unthreatening, secure affection in addition to self-destructive, taboo sex. Drinking heavily, he became savage, alluring frequently to intimacies with Augusta, which Lady Byron tried at first to ignore. When she discovered she was pregnant, Byron tried to be a fond, attentive husband, but he engaged in continual acts of sabotage. He may have had a mental crisis around this time. Anyway, within a year of their marriage, Lady Byron gave birth to a child, their daughter Ada. But soon after that, Lady Byron left him for good. She said of his capacity for redemption, "He is a very bad, very good man," she wrote. He only knew his daughter for a month. Lady Byron went back to her parents, taking her child with them. News of Byron's affair with his sister Augusta came to the shock and dismay of the Victorian reading public. The tide of public opinion turned against him. He decided to leave England forever. He wrote one of his most notorious poems at this time. It was the first poem he ever dedicated to his wife, and it goes like this. Fare thee well, and if forever, still forever, fare thee well. Even thou unforgiving, never against thee shall my heart rebel. All my faults perchance thou knowest, all my madness none shall know, all my hopes, wherever thou goest, whither, yet with thee they go. Fare thee well, thus disunited, torn from every nearer tie, seared in heart and lone and blighted. More than this, I scarce can die. In this poem, Byron's self-pity is obvious. Lady Byron was not fooled. There would be no reconciliation, and as I said, he left England for good. The bulk of my talk is to concern his years spent in Venice from December 1816 to December 1819. Venice had long been for him the greenest isle of my imagination. He liked the decadence of the place. Almost immediately upon his arrival, he began organizing his life in Venice around sexual indulgence. He told his publisher, Murray, I have had more women than I can count or recount in Venice. Almost 30 years old, he became an international celebrity, a figure of glamour and scandal. He was handsome and possessed of considerable wealth. I shall not live long, he wrote, and for that reason, I must live while I can. To his friend, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, his life in Venice seemed full of a particularly Italian squalor, and Mary Shelley wrote of her fears that he would become a lost man, for he associates with people who do not scruple to avow practices which are not only not named, but are believed seldom conceived in England. But Byron was undergoing a transformation in Venice that would enable his greatest and most groundbreaking poetic achievements. He sensed a connection between his extensive sexual experience and the style and content of his great masterpiece poem, Don Juan. He wrote, could any man have written it who has not lived in the world? Byron claimed he could turn his wide-ranging promiscuous experience to creative account. And of course he did in this poem. He became the lover of many women. He chose those already married who could only make certain demands upon him. But around this time, he began to visit and eventually live in a community with a group of monks on the island of San Lazaro, just off Venice. He first seriously turned toward religion, and specifically toward Roman Catholicism, during his time in Venice. His life in Venice is difficult to describe. During the day, his conduct on the mainland was riotous, but at the same time, he seemed close to turning to faith, and insofar as he found any answers, they were in the direction of Catholicism. The Venetian period at San Lazaro was the crucial period. A strange duality existed in the Venetian period. On the one hand, during the day, he associated with the pious monks and Father Auscher. On the other hand, in the evening, he went back to the mainland, where he remained in contact with the lowest parts of Venetian life. He remained suspended in a kind of equilibrium, studious in the day and dissolute in the evening. At the convent, he stayed from morning to evening, reading in the library, walking through the cloisters, or sitting on the terrace overlooking Venice. At the same time, on the mainland in the evening, he lived with a procession of women. Shelley reported, the Italian women with whom he associates are the most contemptible of all who exist under the moon, the most ignorant, the most disgusting countesses who smell strongly of garlic. Lord Byron is familiar with the lowest sort of these women. His people go out and pick them up for him in the streets. So, while he was intensely active in a religious and intellectual sense during the day, during this same period, at night he was at the height of his licentiousness. His biographers have all attempted to explain the moral confusion of this period. He had plunged into affairs with recklessness. He wrote to his friend Moore, "I have hardly had a wink of sleep this past week. I have had some curious adventures. I will work the mine of my youth to the last veins of the ore, and then good night. I will have lived. I will be content." He wrote to another friend, "If I live 10 years longer, you will see it's not over with me. I don't mean in literature, for that is nothing. It may seem odd to say that, but I don't think literature is my vocation. You will see, I will do something else or other." One wonders what he was referring to. Was it a religious vocation? He was reading St. Augustine, and he believed, on the basis of Augustine's life, that the greatest sinner could become the greatest saint. And he wrote an expression of this in another short lyric of this period. It goes like this: "So we'll go no more a roving so late into the night, though the heart be still as loving and the moon be still as bright. For the sword wears out its sheath, and the soul wears out the breast, and the heart must pause to breathe, and love itself have rest. Though the night was made for loving, and the day returns too soon, yet we'll go no more a roving by the light of the moon." During his stay in Venice, he found another new pursuit, the study of the Armenian language. He was working on producing an Armenian English dictionary and on translating the epistles of St. Paul to the Corinthians. He wrote to a friend, "By way of diversion, I am studying daily at an Armenian monastery. I find that my mind wants something craggy to break upon, and this I have chosen to torture me into attention." The island of Lazaro had become a world center for Armenian culture. Every day, Byron was conveyed by gondola to San Lazaro, where he remained at the convent from morning till evening. His philosophy was to become studious in the day and dissolute in the evening. He wrote, "I find it necessary to twist my mind around some severe study, and this, being the hardest I could devise, will be fine." The language did prove very difficult to master. He wrote, "My Armenian lectures continue. I have mastered 30 of the 38 alphabet and some words. My lessons are in the Psalms." He continued, "My way of life has fallen into great regularity. In the mornings, I go over in my gondola to work with the monks in the convent. In the evening, I do something at the theaters or elsewhere." Father Ausher reported once finding Byron sobbing and weeping in front of a crucifix. He seemed to be struggling with his demons. His imagination seemed enlightened by moving between these two realms of sexual indulgence and religious study. During Carnival, he dove into everything with relish. He described Carnival as a time when, this is in poetry, the people take their fill of recreation, and by repentance they grow devout. However high their rank, although they are with fiddling, feasting, dancing, drinking, masking, and many other things which may be had for the asking. He said Carnival had knocked him up, but now everything was Lent with its abstinence. He wrote, "I find the sword wearing out the scabbard, though I have just turned the corner of 29. He was busy working on Don Juan, which was to become his masterpiece. The intensity of his sexual activity during this period was off all normal charts. And also, during this time, he performed another of his epic events. He swam from the Lido to the end of the Grand Canal, a distance of about 4 miles. His friend Shelley wrote of their time together in Venice. Lord Byron gets up at 2. We sit talking from 6 to 8. Then we gallop through the pine forest. We then come home. Byron described their time together. Shelley and I dine and sit up gossiping till 6 in the morning. My establishment consists, besides servants, of 10 horses, 8 enormous dogs, 3 monkeys, 5 cats, an eagle, a crow, and a falcon. And all of these, except the horses, walk about the house as they were masters of it. He kept a menagerie of animals, caged birds, monkeys, dogs, a fox, and a wolf. He had many servants and many mistresses. They came and went. His young daughter, Allegra, by his mistress, Caroline Lamb, stayed with Byron in a nearby convent for the summer. He continued to work on this important work, Don Juan. Byron and Shelley talked of literary matters. Both these poets were at the height of their powers. Byron was ending his relationship with his current mistress, who had threatened him with a knife and thrown herself into the canal, becoming too unmanageable even for him. And then a traumatic event occurred. Shelley and a friend went sailing on the afternoon of July 8th, despite storm clouds to the west. 10 days later, Shelley's body washed ashore. His body and the man he sailed with, were buried in the sand and could only be removed if they were cremated on the seashore. And so they burned the bodies. Shelley's heart miraculously refused to burn. They eventually presented it to his wife, Mary Shelley, as a keepsake. It was the last of a series of blows that had fallen on him. He was haunted by the corpses on the seashore. Then his thoughts went elsewhere, to the Greek War of Independence. Greece was associated in his mind with usefulness, health, and strength. Greece was a happy place. By 1823, the Greek War of Independence was underway. Byron offered to go to Greece, whatever he could do, to aid the revolution. This is a picture of his landing in Missolonghi, coming to Greece. He was only 36 years old. He wrote, "I feel 60 in mind, and I'm less capable than ever of those nameless attentions that all women, but above all, Italian women, require." He felt himself flattening out. He spoke with envy of those who were lucky enough to die young. In a rush of vitality, he had written almost 2/3 of his masterpiece in little more than a year. He wrote, "In youth, I wrote because my mind was full. Now I write because I feel it growing old." He developed the poem within the ottava rima form. It's 8 lines to a stanza, and it became his own particular poetic idiom. It combined everyday speech, poetic writing, cliches, cockney, slang, epic rhetoric, professional jargon, and the fashionable voice of aristocrats. Again, he gave himself selflessly to women, but finally finished the last canto of Don Juan, the 16th. Teresa Guiccioli, his last great love, wrote him many letters full of loving domestic commands, urging him to take care of his health, keep out of the burning sunlight, have cooling drinks, Take plenty of exercise. Byron reassured her. They would reunite to get together soon, and nothing would be able to part them again. She was, of course, married, but she was his last great love. He spent his last few afternoon hours in Venice alone with Teresa. Mary Shelley arrived by prior arrangement so that Teresa would not have to be alone. He wrote her, I was a fool to come here, but being here, I must see what is to be done. While in Greece, he had a series of conversations on religion with an evangelical Scottish surgeon, Dr. Kennedy, and he attended a kind of Bible study group. Byron wrote, he thinks me so nearly a tolerable Christian that he is trying to make me a whole one. His conversations with Kennedy revealed a latent and unsettled faith. One night he asked Kennedy, what more do you wish of me in order to reckon me a good Christian? To which the doctor replied, just kneel down and pray to God. Byron demurred, this is too much, dear doctor. Instead, he presented Kennedy with a donation to the School of Greek Women. He contracted typhoid fever. He was treated by doctors who removed almost 2 liters of his blood while giving him purgatives until he was fatally dehydrated and exhausted. Given the treatment, actually, it is a wonder that he survived it at all for as long as he did. His last words were, I want to sleep now. On his birthday that January, he had written his final poetic masterpiece, a poem entitled, On This Day, I Complete My 36th Year. Byron had spent most of his life on the move. He had been a pilgrim and a wanderer, a temporary resident of country houses, college rooms, city flats, monasteries, villas, inns, cottages, but he was done with wandering. After he died, his heart was removed for embalming and remained in Missolonghi, and he was interred in a spot in the Garden of Heroes. Greece had become his final adopted home. A plaque was erected outside the San Lazzaro Monastery to the memory of the English poet Lord Byron, devoted friend of Armenia, who died for the liberation of Greece. And the plaque read, the visitor will be convinced that there are other and better things even in this life. Byron, 1788 to 1824. And I thought I would conclude by showing you at least one stanza from Don Juan, because I've been telling you here that it is his masterpiece. It's written in 16 cantos, each canto about 1,000 lines. So it's quite a long poem. And it tells the story of the adventures of Don Juan with various ladies, some of whom he falls in love with, and then something happens and he finds another. It's a narrative poem, but this is one of the typical stanzas. And I think when he wrote this one, he was thinking of his wife, Lady Byron. 'Tis pity learned virgins ever wed with persons of no sort of education, or gentlemen who, though well born and bred, grow tired of scientific conversation. I don't choose to say much upon this head. I'm a plain man and in a single station. But oh, ye lords of ladies intellectual, inform us truly, have they not henpecked you all? So that's one example of very, very clever rhyming that goes throughout Don Juan. It's a wonderful poem, and I recommend it if you have time to read it. It's quite long, but it's his masterpiece. So I will now answer any questions you have or anything you want to talk about as a result of the lecture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Heineman. And I invite anyone who has questions to please drop them in the chat. And in the meantime, I do have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
Okay.
One, I'm curious, was typhoid fever something very common at the time?
Yes, it was. And you know, it was deathly. You were killed by it.
Mhm. And I'm curious too, the heart embalming, was that by choice? Was that something that he wanted done?
I don't know. I don't know. As I told you, Shelley's heart didn't burn when they had this funeral pyre on the beach in Venice when his body washed up. They had to burn the bodies. That was by law, but the heart didn't burn, and they preserved it and they gave it to Mary Shelley, and she kept it all her life. She had it in a kind of silver box, and so and Byron's heart. This has done several poets. Hardy, for example, when Hardy died, he wanted his body to be buried in near his house in his rural setting. But he was a great poet, and they said he had to be buried in Westminster Abbey. So what they did was they took the heart out of the corpse and they buried the heart in his hometown and brought the corpse back to Westminster Abbey. So it's something of a practice, a strange practice, but done several times that I know about. Certain Byron, Shelley, Hardy, maybe that's what they did with poets. I don't know. So you wrote, I read here, did he ever return to his estates in England? Never did, never. Uh, uh, Newstead Abbey is a beautiful place to visit. I visited it. It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful estate and very well kept up with much Byron memorabilia there. So if you go to England, you can visit Newstead Abbey and it's worth the trip. But he never went back. His daughter, Ava Lovelace, yes, that's right. But he never helped raise her right. No, he never did. He never had anything to, well, no, he never did. His other illegitimate child, whom he had by Caroline Lamb, he took her from Caroline Lamb. He thought she was not the right mother for the child. And he brought her to Venice and put her in a convent in Venice. And when she was 5 years old, she died in that convent, probably of typhoid fever. I don't know what she died of. So he had those two children, his natural daughter, Ada, and then Allegra, who was his illegitimate daughter by Caroline Lamb. As I recall, Byron, Shelley, and Keats were all a group. What do you think drew them to each other? Well, they were a group. Think about the writing of Frankenstein. That was done on that night when Byron, Shelley, and Mary Shelley, and of course a couple of other people got together and resolved to write a mystery story. They were a group. There are 6 great romantic poets. Now, Wordsworth and Coleridge were their own group. They became friends. And Keats, of course, Keats died so young. He died in his 20s, and he had was studying to be a doctor, and he was writing his poetry. He was really a group of his own. But Byron and Shelley and some other people they were friends with were really a group, and they cross-fertilized each other. They were very, they shared their poetic thoughts and their practices in a way that is almost unique. I don't know if another group that had that kind of close relationship. Did Shelley's death send him on? Yes, of course, it was terrible. You know, they went out, they knew that a storm was coming up, but they had bought this big sailboat. Shelley had money, also Byron. They bought this big sailboat, and Shelley went out with one other passenger on a very windy, stormy day. and the boat eventually capsized. It took 10 days for their bodies to wash up. It was a traumatic event for Byron. In a sense, in losing Shelley, he lost his greatest poetic friend, the one he shared all kinds of thoughts with. So yes, I do believe it was part of the downward spiral of his life. It seems that his governess had, yes, those nurses, it's terrible stories what those Scottish nurses did to him. And it set him on a kind of path that in a sense he never recovered from. Do we know what he was like as a child? Well, not too much, but we know that his mother could not control him. He ruled Newstead Abbey. He had all these strange animals in the place. He had parties. He brought friends from college, and they had drunken orgies there. And it's incredible to me that in the midst of this dissolution, he had the discipline to write a poem like Don Juan. Don Juan is a very carefully crafted poem full of the most marvelous rhymes. I mean, the rhymes are terrific. This is the ottava riva, you see, form. And it always ends with that couplet, the rhyming couplet, but oh, ye lords of ladies intellectual, informers truly, have they not impectual? How he managed to maintain his poetic gift and his work with the monks and translation of the Armenian language and this tremendously dissolute life is a mystery to me. Of course, he says in the poem that he began to wear himself out. He felt like a man of 60, although he was only 36 when he died. Okay, any other questions? So I really send you off on a quest. Get a copy of Don Juan, and you can read it a little at a time. And it's witty, it's very witty, it's very funny. It's a great story. It's a story of Don Juan and his adventures. And but no one teaches it anymore. It's too long. All those romantic poets, Wordsworth writing the Prelude, which was 12 books. No one teaches the Prelude anymore. Coleridge, people do teach the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is a long poem, but it's not that long. Keats spent his whole poetic life trying to write long poems because long poems were in fashion. And he sort of jotted on old pieces of paper the odes and the Eve of St. Agnes, the poems that made his fame. But he was trying always to write the long poem. It was the convention at the time. Tennyson wrote only long poems. Idylls of the King is 12 books. Browning, The Ring and the Book is 12 books. Even Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote Aurora Leigh, which is 12 books. But at the end of the 19th century, things changed. We began to have attention deficit disorders, and we didn't write those long poems anymore. But if you were to read only one long poem that might be fun, Don Juan would be it. Okay. Any other questions? Was he financially? Oh, yes. He had money anyway. He inherited money through his father, who was a Scottish nobleman, and his mother. Was he financially successful? Yes. Childe Harold, that first book that made him famous at the age of 24, he earned a lot of money. He was very well off through the writing of his poetry and his inheritances. I would say probably of all the Romantic poets, he was the most financially successful in his writing. Was Queen Victoria? I don't think so. I don't know. I really can't answer that question. She's much later. He was dead at the beginning of her reign, really. She was a fan of Tennyson and the later Victorian poets. I don't have any knowledge or record or recollection of learning that she had ever read some of Byron's work. Was the desire to write long poems influenced by the Homeric epics? Probably. Starting with the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid. They're all long. They're all 12 books. Then you come into Beowulf. That's a long poem. Then come into the Fairy Queen, Spenser, the Fairy Queen is 12 books. It was the convention, Milton, Paradise Lost. I used to actually teach Paradise Lost. I don't think you can teach it anymore. I don't know. I've not tried it. But the long poem, it ends really at the end of the 19th century. Who was he writing about? And She Walks in Beauty. I think he was writing about his wife. And how did he charm so many women? Well, first of all, he was handsome, as you can see from some of the paintings that I've shown you. He was a very handsome man. He had money. He had wit. Mad, bad, and dangerous to know, but they all fell in love with him. But his wife had to put up with the sister. We once asked one of our teachers, why did he have an affair with his half-sister? And one professor I had said, she was the woman he found most like himself, that it was partially his ego, that in his half-sister, he found a mirror image of himself, and he fell in love with it. I don't know.
Helen, related to that, did he and his half-sister actually grow up together, or do they meet sort of later on in life?
They met later on in life. They didn't grow up together. She was a half-sister too.
Mhm.
They met in later life, and it just instantly hit them. This similarity between them and affinity between them. You know, Wordsworth and his sister. Wordsworth loved his sister. I don't think sexually. I'm sure not sexually, but brother and sister. That's a very close relationship at that time. Wordsworth had it with his sister Dorothy. In fact, she was on the day that he got married. She asked him to wear the wedding ring that night. She wore it on her finger and then gave it to him in the morning for him to give to his wife. So Wordsworth had a very close relationship with his sister Dorothy. You know, somebody could write a book about the brother-sister relationship in this period. But I don't know any much more about it.
Mm.
Any other questions?
Yes, in fact, there is one more here. How did he charm so many women?
Oh, I can't, I can't answer that. He was handsome. He was good looking. He was flamboyant. He had money. He dressed beautifully. You know, look at Shelley and Mary Shelley, another love affair. Shelley was a very handsome man too. They were good looking. They were good looking men. And part of it was looks, but part of it also was the poetry that they shared, and women responded to it.
We do have one more question here as well. You alluded to this earlier.
Yeah.
Why was the programming language named after his daughter Ada? And I know you mentioned her connection to computers, to what we know today.
I didn't get the beginning of why did he name her Ada?
Why was the programming language named after his daughter Ada?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. But, you know, when he makes that couple about, tell us about ladies intellectual, have they not impectual? He didn't seem to want to have a relationship with an intellectual woman.
Mm.
His wife certainly was intellectual. She was a mathematician. And I think he loved her somewhat, but this business of flaunting the sister all the time obviously was the end of that relationship. But I can't really answer how how he charmed so many women. I think any one of us would have been charmed by Lord Byron.
Was his marriage a love match, or was it arranged?
Oh, no, it was a love match. But remember, he said he felt he wanted to get out of the life he was living. And he thought he could get out of with poetry, with travel, or with marriage. And he chose marriage as the way to get out of his dissolute life. It's a terrible decision. It's not going to work.
Mm. All right.
So, and by the way, I should tell you, there's a new book I'll show you the cover. Well, I can't show you. It's called Byron, A Life in 10 Letters. And it's by Andrew Stauffer. And it's worth reading. What Stauffer does in this book, there's 10 chapters. He takes a letter from a certain period of Byron's life. He prints the letter, and then he shows you what that letter showed about Byron at that particular time of his life. And I really recommend this book. There, I can hold it up here, I guess. It's called A Life in 10 Letters. In fact, this book was so popular when it came out this year, that publishers have taken up the idea of telling the story of other writers through 10 letters from their life. So that, for example, there's early letters. Then he's got one chapter is called Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know, which is about his affairs. He's got a chapter called Fare Thee Well, which was a letter he wrote to Lady Byron. Then he's got a letter about Venice, Haunted Summer. I thought it was a very interesting book. I used it in the preparation of this lecture, and I do recommend it to you if you're interested in following up his life.
Great. Thank you so much tonight. This was just a wonderful lecture as usual, and glad to have everyone on with us this evening, and we look forward to having you again.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Very good. Wonderful.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Well, go out and read Don Juan.
I will.
I have it here in one of my books.